All right.
Good.
So Alix Peabody, who I have like a girl crush on, is a CEO and founder of Bev, the mission-driven beverage company based in Venice, California. At the age of 24, Alix began experiencing life-altering reproductive health issues, causing various surgeries, and ultimately was faced with the decision to freeze her eggs. In an effort to pay off her medical bills, Alix started throwing ticketed pool parties in Sonoma, California, bringing together an eclectic and electric group of San Francisco millennials. The parties became known for their inclusivity, energy, female-centric audiences, leading Alix to the idea of creating this female-owned social space on a larger scale. Ultimately, she realized that there was very little out there that spoke to and about women in a positive, authentic way. And as a result, Bev was born. The female-first beverage brand on a mission to #break the glass. Creating a voice for women where there had never really been one was and is Alix's driving force. With the impetus for a brand in place, Alix cashed out her 401k, bought 300 gallons of rosé, and launched her first product. Bev is a crisp, dry, and a little fizzy California rosé with 0 grams of sugar. No biggie.
Now there's other ones too, which you're
now there's other ones. Y'all. I know, Kaylee and I are rocking them. This is the Sauvignon Blanc, and then there's Pinot Grigio. I've been trying them all. And basically, you have sleek, unapologetically pink and a badass color brand cans, as well as a strong female forward force. You already have amassed a cult-like following, and it's unique because it represents so much more than canned wine. It's a movement rooted in the concepts of empowering underserved communities and redefining the traditional adult beverage industry. So is there anything we missed? Any updates?
Oh, geez. I was like, that sounded way fancier than I say it. I'm like, I make booze for a living, which is not, yeah. So no, it sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay, cool. All right. So how did you, just to like get things started, why did you decide, or how did you decide on events as a way to like make your first 20K?
Yeah, so it was kind of crazy. It was kind of by accident, and I think a lot of people fall into things by accident in the entrepreneurial worlds. But I had thrown this sort of like party thing when I first moved to San Francisco, basically because I didn't know anybody there. So I just like I called whatever, like the 5 people that I knew that lived in San Francisco, and told them each to bring, 3 or 4 friends to this random party that I was throwing. And it ended up being like kind of huge. I didn't realize San Francisco, and I don't know if you guys are in SF, any of you, but in the summer it's cold, and it was at my aunt and uncle's house, which was north, and they had a pool, and it was just like really warm. So it ended up getting really packed and crowded, and I just had a lot of questions about whether I was going to throw something like that again. And I was like, I can't afford that. That was, those things end up sneaking up on you, in terms of how expensive they are. So at that point, I just had a lot of people telling me that they wanted me to throw another party. And and I was basically just like trying to figure out how I was going to pay all my medical bills. So I was like, maybe if I charge tickets, people will want to come, and they did. So then I just kept doing it until I'd paid off my eggs, which people did not know. It was not like an egg freezing party. I did not realize that that's what was happening. That I guess they do now, but
I love it. How did you create such an inclusive event? I mean, was it just like the people that you initially invited, and then that kind of led to just the right vibe, or was there anything that you did?
the house was at my aunt's house, and she's just kind of like a total matriarch, if you will. Like, she's just a badass woman. She's super cool. And so I think part of it too, like I joke with people, I'm like, you've never been to a party, thrown by a woman that doesn't at least like remember the snacks, like it's just a different vibe. We tend to remember those types of things. And so it was just the kind of thing where we were really, she and I were really hosting and like bringing our spirit into the the event. And I think that just kind of carried through, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have this event company, and then you're like, all right, you're loving the entrepreneurship thing.
I would barely call it a company at the time, but yeah.
Like egg side hustle.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
And then how did you end up like what happened between then to the point you decided to like, say that again?
That and wine.
Yeah, that and wine. Like how,
Yeah.
tell me more
Yeah.
about
So yeah, totally. So it was kind of weird because I'd kind of had in my mind, like I've always been really passionate about gender dynamics and particularly like what happens when people start drinking and, you know, sort of the social walls come down um, and people start to just be a little bit less inhibited. I went to a school that was very fraternity heavy. And I saw a lot of, you know, what happens when you sort of start to like funnel women into frat basements. And it's just a really male owned space and it's oftentimes not very pretty. Right. And I think that there's like a couple really interesting things about that. First of all, you know, there are environments where like groupthink really starts to take over and it's not always like a positive groupthink in my experience. Usually not. And on top of it, you know, I found that not only can that be uncomfortable for women, but it can also be uncomfortable for men who like see things that they don't like or respect, but you know, maybe it's not their house or it's not their whatever, and they don't feel comfortable saying it or talking about it. And so for me, this was something that I've been really passionate about since I was in college and, you know, and through a whole bunch of experiences that I had both in school and in the working world. Um, and and so I wanted to do something that sort of like addressed that issue, but in a way that was approachable and not alienating, if that makes any sense. Like I was like, how do I do this? How do I accidentally turn men into feminists without them realizing it? Like, what do I need to do? Was kind of like my super original thought. And how do I do it in kind of like a fun way? Like this should be a fun thing. And so as I started to, you know, think about, I was like, I'll make some amorphous like events media company. I don't know. I was like girl boss, but like about fun instead of about work or whatever. And I very quickly realized that it's extremely hard to build and fund a media company. You kind of have to like build the whole thing first before you get funding. You have to have like the audience and the users and all of that kind of stuff, which I was just like, whoa, I don't have any like money left at this point. And so because it mostly just I was like drowning in medical bills, and it had totally drained my savings. And I was only 24, so there wasn't much savings to speak of to begin with. But so I was like, well, what's at every party? And I started like thinking about different products that I could launch. And I was like, well, every party you've ever been to has booze. So I started kind of like looking into that space a little bit, and I realized really quickly that if you got next time you guys are in a bar, if that ever happens again, or like just in the grocery store, just walk down the liquor aisle and you'll start to notice it's like silver, blue, brown, black, like very, very masculine. Just look at some of the labels, you know, Jack Daniels, Johnny Walker, even like Casamigos. It's all guys all day long. And so as I started to dig in, I was like, wait, there's no real product in this space that's not about guys or guys buying drinks for girls. There's, you know, or for women, but hopefully not for girls. But it was, you know, I just kind of realized that it was not something that that women had really like played in as far as the space is concerned. And as I dug into it more and more, you know, and I say to people too, I'm like, what does it mean about whose space it is if you're in a bar at a party, if we don't even make products that speak to the women there? Like, who really owns that space? Who is it for, right? And as I started to kind of like look into it more and more, I kind of realized that along every single step of the food chain, like every time you buy a drink, in most places, like every time you buy groceries, you know, there is a long chain of men that are making money off of that. Which is very, very interesting when you start to dig into it. So at that point, I was like, well, now I have to go into this industry because there's like nothing here. And I just wanted to kind of make a brand that spoke a little bit differently about all of this stuff. So at that point, that's how I figured out my product. I was like, how am I going to do this? This was kind of before the canned wine craze. And so I put it in a can actually, because, sorry, I'm rambling. Stop me if I'm not interesting, but I put it in a can because I was like, if you pour something into a glass, like if I had like a drink in here, you would have no idea what it is at all, right? And it's extremely expensive to brand a spirit, if you think about it. Like, you don't know if it's whiskey or scotch or tequila or vodka, let alone what brand. And so at that point, I was like, well, if I put it in a can, kind of like Red Bull, at least you'll like know what it is, and I don't have any money to market it. So that's how I ended up in a can. And I ended up picking wine because I realized that there was just such a nightmare of a distribution thing. I don't know if any of you guys are into like consumer package or spirits or anything like that, but like, Lord, could I tell you some stories? And you need by law a distributor to sell and to even get on the shelf. And I knew that that was going to be really difficult to do. But in California, if you're a winery, you can have wine clubs and you can ship into 44 different states. So I was like, well, if I make a wine and I stick it in a cute can, you know, to me, that was like my first piece of content for the brand I wanted to build rather than starting with the product. So long-winded answer, but that's how I ended up cashing out my 401k and buying 300 gallons of rosé with it. And everyone thought I'd completely lost my mind. I was like, you know, at this point, screw it. Got nothing to lose. So.
Okay. So you did this. You like cash out your 401k, you have your product, you have the vision. How did you immediately, was like that when you developed like the Instagrammable brand? Like how did you go about it? Who did you team up with? I mean,
yeah. So I, you know, it's kind of funny because like in the beginning, they always say like, don't work with your friends, you know, but then I'm also like, or your family. I do both. So I'm not a good person to talk to, but I'm also like, no one else is going to be crazy enough to work for you at the beginning. Like if you don't have, you know, so sometimes I don't know, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, I guess. I mean, I've had both experiences, but my cousin is actually our creative director, and I would go over to her house, just like be casually like sitting there. Here, I'm going to turn this light on. Totally just like creeping in her bedroom until when she would get home from work, and just make her mock up cans after work, like every single day. The writing on the side of the can where it says, I think yours should say made by chicks, right? Or does it still say?
Oh yeah. It says made by chicks like near.
Oh no, but it says break the glass still. Okay. There are different runs. Yeah. That's her handwriting. So we had to like make a font out of it on Photoshop, which was really funny. But so it's her handwriting. The original logo was just her handwriting as well, and then we kind of like cleaned it up a little bit. But yeah, so that was so I basically made her do it, and then I recruited one of my good friends to like help with operations. He was running the Apple store in San Francisco at the time. And I just like walked in and I was like, hey, you're going to come work for me. And he was like, you're at my work. Like I'm currently at my work, and I'm not working for you. And then, you know, lo and behold, like 3 months later, he quit. So I don't know, did I answer your question? I kind of got
yeah. Well, I love it. Like this so scrappy, and yet like look at what it became. And I also love that you have your cats. Cats. Is it your cats in your brand name?
Oh yeah, Harold. Yeah, Harold is oh wait, hold on. This is so nerdy. Wait, stop.
Harold is
reminding me to take out the trash, but I'm not home. Hold on.
My favorite thing was to text Meow to sign up for texts.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you liked it. Harold,
so much.
Harold is there's something like a little bit deeper there that I don't really tell people about. I'm like hoping that people kind of like hint, hint, wink, wink, get it. But you know, there's like dogs have such good PR, you know, it's like man's best friend. And like, you know, women and cats have the same problem really when it comes to our press. So anyway, so I was kind of, but Harold is my cat, and he's been my cat pretty much since right around when I started the company. And he's like a little Yoda. It's very weird. He's got like a very like human-like attitude and personality. So people started getting like obsessed with him, and then it became a weird thing where people just kept getting cats that looked like Harold. And now there are like 11, like I'm not even joking. They're not mine. I don't have 11 cats, for the record. I have 2. But like people on my team have just started getting them, and then eventually we implemented a kitten policy where if you've been there a year, you can get a Harold's.
I love it. I am definitely a cat person, and I own a dog, although my husband has stolen my cat because the cat lives in his room, in his office.
Yeah.
I'm a dog.
My husband prefers one of my cats to me, but that's okay. Oh, the white one, the one that's on the bottom of the website.
Yeah.
She's the other one, and she's all over the merch and stuff, but
Real cute. So to get into the more nitty gritty, what are some of the greatest challenges you've experienced building Bev?
oh my God, what kind of pick your category.
Okay, I don't know, favorite challenge or
I literally pick any category of challenge. I've had all the challenges. I've had like the we're gonna run out of money challenge, which everyone has. That's not a fun one. I've had the we're gonna run out of inventory challenge, which is a much nicer challenge. Though still problematic. I've had, I think it's just like the whole entrepreneurial journey is just like one set of really difficult problems after another. And once you think you've mastered one, then like a whole new series of them just appears out of nowhere. So it's just kind of been that over and over again. But yeah, I mean, raising money was really tough at the beginning, especially because, I work in a category that a lot of venture funds aren't allowed to invest in because it's vice technically. So they can't do booze, tobacco, weed, firearms, or sex toys. Oh my God, I'm sorry, my mom has the creepiest clock. It like does a rooster thing. Oh, sorry, on like weird hours, like it's 8:18. That makes no sense. Anyway, so anyway, so yeah, so it was that those parts were all kind of fundraising was really tough, and then. Yeah, I mean, and then scaling is tough, and like keeping a culture while scaling is tough, and hiring people that you trust. I've had a lot of issues too. Like, I really struggle with the balance between making people earn their way into responsibility and being overly like, well, you know better than I do. That's why I hired you, and then realizing that like people aren't always as competent as you think they're going to be in certain things. And that has been a really like tight line. That's been a tight dance. So I've had experiences on both sides where it's like, I gave the keys to the kingdom to someone too fast and they almost ran it into the ground. And then I've had issues where people are like, Alix, you have to, like give me access to Shopify to do my job or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like, and everything in between. So those have been definitely big challenges, but
yeah, that's legit. We have a question from the group.
Oh yes.
How have you kept culture while scaling / protected your mission?
Yeah, it's not easy. I am like militant about culture. That's a weird, our culture is not militant, but I am very like culture. And to me, especially if you're doing something that's very brand oriented, it's everything because it's going to seep through how people talk to each other, how they talk to customers, how they talk about the brand, and in something that's so dealing with, people at grocery stores or, the checkout person or the bartender, like the face of the brand and how people and the energy that people kind of exude is so important. So for me, I am just like a culture Mongol to the point where like at one point, my director of sales is like, we also have to sell stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, oops. So I think that's, that's kind of, it's just my main focus a lot of the time. And we have all sorts of little things. I mean, there are tactical things you can do, like make sure that you're regularly having all hands, and especially virtually, that's been a challenge, right? Making sure that we're putting like happy hours on the calendar and stuff like that. And I think, I don't know what stage of businesses some of you guys are at, but at a certain point, you just get like, it feels like you're babysitting some days. Like it feels like you're just like dealing with people's feelings all the time, which I've come to realize is just management. And you're dealing with, and at a certain point you'll be like, oh my God, I've got so much going on. I don't have time for my one-on-ones right now, or I don't have time to like do those morale check-ins. And every single time you skip them, everything suffers. So I think that's something that has been a big learning for me, where it's like how people are feeling and morale and culture is not a nice to have, it's a need to have, even though it doesn't always feel like it at the beginning.
Ooh, that's legit. I'm going to like take us in a different direction, because today we're talking about customer perception. And after this, they're going to be doing a workshop that teaches them how to like do good customer interviews. But I'm curious for you. So have you ever had the product like evolve, and how have things or your brand changed based on what you've learned from your customers?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had the product evolve, both in like taste, a little bit in taste, and, you know, in packaging, it's just kind of cleaned up. Yeah, it's cleaned up a fair amount. What have I learned? Honestly, if you guys like come up with good customer surveys, send them to me. I can use them. But you know, I think it's just listening, you know, and really having your ear to the ground, as much like actively. And I think it's so easy to sometimes just be like, I have this vision in my head and I know what I'm going to do, and and that's what people want. But you also have to realize that sometimes you have to like meet what you want to tell people with how they're going to hear it, which can be slightly different, if that makes sense. But it's always going to evolve, right? I mean, anything you do is going to evolve, the product, the messaging. And I've found that it's been very helpful to almost like, instead of like dictating some stuff about the brand, really have more like pillars of frameworks, you know, about how, so like oh my God, I'm so sorry. That thing is, what is that thing? Sorry, that was so creepy. You know, have more like frameworks, you know, and so there are certain things like our colors are like bright and happy, and we have like specific tones that we use, and we have certain things that we don't say, and we have certain things where I'm like, we don't man hate our business. Like, we are a feminist brand that does not man hate, right? And so it's like that we have to make sure that that's in the messaging, and leaving kind of more frameworks, and then letting the team who's like interacting with the consumer and just looking at the data of like, how are people you know, what posts are performing, and then trying to dig into why, has been super helpful. Also, like, it's not that hard for me to get consumer feedback, because nobody doesn't want free booze.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah. I can imagine. Like,
yeah, people are pretty excited about giving me feedback. And the feedback gets nicer the more I give them, you know, so.
I mean, of course. Although that's got to be hard for you, because it's like, are they just drunk?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or both? What?
At least I know it works, you know.
That is so true. I am fascinated. I love that I'm like, I can't quote who exactly it was, your huge investor. Okay, so it was hard to get fundraising in the beginning, and then now you've like landed this massive investment.
Yeah, it was over a year ago now, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, what's the question?
Oh, the question is like, how did you go about that? What do you think got you there, and how did you approach fundraising? And
yeah,
I know he's like one of the biggest investors in Silicon Valley.
Oh, Brian Singerman, like founder's son. Yeah. So I was very well. I have a couple things on the topic. Are you guys mostly looking for VC funding?
Yes and no. So there's like a mix, but I still think you're one of a few, if not our only speakers that's gotten VC funding. And so I think it's important to have you talk about it.
Yeah. So if you cannot, don't. This is my new goal, is to never do it again, for a series of reasons. That said, it's been like, I just feel like when you go into the Silicon Valley world and whatever, there's such a treadmill, you know, where it's like, it's all about, what do I need to do to get to my next raise? And I think COVID has started to flip that a little bit, because people actually have to have sustainable businesses that are going to make money. But it's like way cooler to bootstrap and actually make money than it is to just like raise from somebody and get a press release about it, which is what I've kind of learned on the back end. That said, sometimes you need to do it. Our industry is really expensive because you have to buy so much inventory and stuff, and you can't really get like credit lines at the beginning. And you have to buy it up front, obviously, before anybody can taste it and, you know, take it on to their store or whatever. But that said, I got well over like 100 no's, hands down. And I would do crazy shit. Like, I barely slept during that time period. I gave myself like a very, I'm trying to think of like the top 3 tips that will be helpful. I gave myself a time during which I had to get it done. If you don't do that, it can just drag on forever. And when you're fundraising, if you choose to do that, it's really a full-time job. So other things need to be set up properly to kind of run without you, because your business will suffer from it, because you kind of just have to be away and focused on something that's external for so long that's not actually building the business. For me, I had like 4 months during which I had to do it because otherwise I was going to run out of health insurance, and I needed to like have enough funding to have, you know, to be able to provide health insurance, like first and foremost for myself. But all to say, it was just like a lot of hustling. I would do stuff like I would email someone, create urgency. So like I would tell someone like, oh, I'm in New York, like for the next 48 hours. Do you want to like meet for a coffee? But I'm like sitting in my bed in LA. And then they'd be like, yeah, sure. Like, how's tomorrow at 10 a.m.? And then I would get on a red eye, literally. Like, I did this dozens of times, but it was just like, you know, I wasn't going to fly there unless I knew that I had something to do there. And then I was just going to pretend I was there anyway. So I did stuff like that over and over again to kind of like develop urgency. You really have to keep people on a timeline where it's like, this is my favorite fundraising line. I'm deciding allocations next week, which basically says like, everybody wants to invest in me, so I'm going to decide who I'm going to let in next week without actually saying that and lying, you know? So that's a good line. And then the other big tip so just like urgency, schedule, creating like demand. You kind of have to like market your deal. You have to remember that if you fundraise, like you're just a deal that's going across someone's desk and they see dozens a day because that's their job. So you kind of have to like market your deal the same way you would market your product, right? And be kind of, you know, sneaky about it. And then the last thing I'd say is that if you are fundraising, and this is true for, you know, angel investors or VCs alike, you always remember that like they're not giving you something that you want or need. You are the thing that stands between them and what they want, which is the pot of gold that you know you're sitting on because you are going to crush it with your business. And once you make that mental switch, it gets a lot easier, right? It's all like a power dynamics game. And if you think about people who invest, a lot of the time it's they're competitive people by nature, right? And so they just like want to win. So you just have to give them something that they want to win, you know, in your mind. They're not philanthropists for the most part. I mean, maybe they are, but not
right.
No,
They want their
investment arm, I imagine. Anyway,
sure.
I hope that's helpful.
That's super helpful. Okay, other question. How have you, so you've had a VC investment. Have you been able, and how have you been able to protect your mission?
Yeah, I mean, it's just at the core of everything that I do. It's not even like a protect it thing. It's like I wouldn't be able to operate without it as a guiding force, if that makes sense. So there are just certain things that that we won't do. Like I won't deal with asshole buyers. We won't, if we have like bars that we went into, this was before, but like we wouldn't, support bars that didn't have certain things in place to like protect the women in there, stuff like that, where it's like, it's kind of the guiding force of what we do.
I love it. Okay, there's 2 questions on customer feedback. Okay, so number 1, is there any other way to get customer feedback other than product? I'm also guessing discounts.
Your product. Yeah, discounts. And just like humility, works. It goes very far. Just literally, you know, telling people like I'm a small business and I'd love, you know, and I could really use the help. Like people are a lot nicer than we give them credit for, I think. So, and they want to support, you know, especially right now, people want to support, you know, entrepreneurs and small business. And so I think it's a good time to just like have that, not be afraid to use that, you know, and just ask people genuinely for their advice. Like people will give us feedback, you know, and buy the product. So you don't always have to, you know, trade those off.
Away. Is there anything you do specifically to trade product for feedback? Like, is there anything you do, or is it more just like, hey, we're at a party?
What do you mean by that exactly?
Chloe,
Like,
do you want to clarify? Yeah, sure.
Mute, I think.
I guess the actual process, like how do you go about the trade? Like do you just put out ads? Like what happens to
Yeah, so we do, I mean, it depends on the customer, right? Like for us, we have the customer who buys it at the store level, at the bar level, at the consumer level, and those are all very, at the distributor level. So there's all different like gates. And some of them, like our distributors, will give us feedback just because they also want the product to sell. And same with like people at the store level and stuff like that. When it comes to the consumer, it, again, like sometimes tactically, like maybe the team will DM people on Instagram that we think are in our demo and just ask like, hey, are you down to do this? Most of the time they are. Sometimes it's, you know, just we'll get sort of like target lists together. We have a fair amount of, you know, ads running and stuff like that for our direct to consumer business. Those are more for sales, but it does build out like a list of people who, you know, would be interested in your product in some way. You know, when they're clicking and adding their emails and stuff like that. So there's always the opportunity to just target them after they've seen an ad as well. And I think also like this, I mean, this isn't necessarily like consumer feedback per se, but I think a lot of the time too, we're like, must have product, must do this, must do that. And I have a lot of friends who have like put out ads about things that didn't exist yet, and then had like a wait list sign up or something on their, you know, website. And that in and of itself will give you feedback of like, do people want this or not? You know, we had an Instagram and started like acquiring followers months before we had a product, right? So there's just things you can do like that are little hacks where just always look for kind of like the back door, you know? I don't know. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, quick logistical question, and then we're gonna wrap up. So, how many stores is Bev in? That's a logistical question.
Oh, like 2000 or something. We're in California, Texas, Tennessee, and Massachusetts because my dad wouldn't shut up about where you could buy it. So that's why we're randomly in Massachusetts. And then soon we'll be in Arizona and Colorado and Nevada. And we're in like Safeway, Total Wine, HEB, Target. We just got into Target. We'll be in Costco pretty soon, Kroger, a lot of places, but only in those states. And then we start to we'll roll out more states, but otherwise people can just buy it online anywhere.
Yeah, and your packaging is adorable. Like, real. Okay.
We're a little backed up because of the inventory issue. So you have issues, tell Christina to email me.
Okay, noted.
I just asked for customer feedback just now.
We'll let you know. Okay, what is next? Like, what is your dream exit, or where do you see Bev going? Like, what is your vision for where you're going to take this?
Yeah, I really, you know, Bev has always been, like I said, like the product is something that I really want to fuel something bigger. So if you think about like Red Bull actually makes as much money off their media house as they do off their beverage sales. They have like a television channel and record labels and all of this kind of stuff. And that's what I've been aiming to build. Like I set out to build a content media company and then somehow wound up in beverage. And so for me, you know, over time, I'd love to make, you know, kind of an iconic brand a la Red Bull style that ends up using that platform to really help further women and minorities in all sorts of cool spaces and just build voices. So that's what I want to do over time. So for me, like an exit would be just like, not, Red Bull's privately owned. Did you guys know that? Isn't that insane?
Wow.
Yeah, still. So is PBR. Crazy. Family owned, both of them. So anyway, so we could do, you know, something of that model would be really cool, which wouldn't necessarily be an exit at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the more you own of your business, the better, you know, so.
That is legit. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Seriously, like it was so cool meeting you and hearing more about your story.
Likewise. Thank you guys.